Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great event on tap. I'm especially excited about this one. But before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use the question and answer tab on your platform here and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $100 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Snyk and Red Hat, the developer-first security experience on OpenShift. This is a great presentation. Before we actually get things kicked off, though, I do want to welcome Michael Wade from Red Hat into our webinar. He's going to say just a few words about the webinar.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I'd like to just thank Snyk for being here. You know, multi-cloud application security is really important for our customers running OpenShift and other platforms, and we're just really excited to have them be a partner with certified software that runs on our platform OpenShift. So thanks for being here today, folks.
All right, thank you, Michael. All right, yes, guys, before I actually introduce our speakers today, I do want to remind the audience we do have a fabulous chat feature that makes things hopefully as interactive as possible for you. So please feel free to chat us up using the chat feature at any time during the webinar. We'll be monitoring that chat, and I imagine our speakers will be as well. Speaking of speakers, so today's webinar is, as I said, Snyk and Red Hat, the developer-first secure experience on OpenShift. Our speakers today are Tomas Gonzalez, who is a partner solutions architect at Snyk, and Parag Dave, who is the product manager for developer tools at Red Hat. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me today. I am, as I said before, so excited about this webinar. I welcome you. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. Tomas, you're going to be kicking off the presentation, I know. So I'm going to put myself on mute, take myself off camera, and let you get right into it.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlene. And thank you, Parag, and everybody in the audience for joining us today. We have a great presentation for you all. Like was mentioned in the introduction, we do have a chat feature. Let's keep this interactive. If you see anything that you would like us to dig into, then we'll be happy to address it during the Q&A at the end. We've set up some time at the end to answer these questions. So today, we're going to be covering 3 main things. I'll first be providing an overview of the Snyk platform, what it is we solve, and just the needs and the synergies that we have with Red Hat. That's going to tie in directly to Parag's section, which he'll be talking about the developer experience within Red Hat and some of the work that we've been doing together around dependency analytics. After that, we're going to tempt the demo gods and show everything live, our full end-to-end story. It's going to be not recorded, done on the fly. So again, may the good demo be with us. And after that, we'll be setting some time for Q&A to recap and for any audience questions that might come in. So with that, I'm going to kick it off, talk a little bit about Snyk and really what it means when we say we're here to help you develop fast and stay secure. So to kick things off, a little bit about Snyk. For those of you not familiar with Snyk, we've been around since 2015. We got our start doing open source dependency vulnerability and license issue identification. And from that point, we have made it so far. We are now over 2.2 million developers using Snyk at a worldwide level, more than 500 employees and constantly growing. and 450 million in various rounds of funding that have allowed us to build the cloud native application security platform that we're centering this partnership with Red Hat around. So there's two main things really that are the problems we're intending to solve. And number one, this concept of digital transformation is all the rage, especially in this past year, but also it's been happening for the past few years. Enterprises, companies, organizations, and individual developers, they're all changing the way they develop software. They want to go faster. They want to add more features. They want to be more agile, respond better to customer needs. And because of that, there's been a change and in the needs of the security testing that's done against the applications that are being built as part of this digital transformation. Now that the cloud has come in, their software is just much more complex than it used to be. So to talk about that particular point, let me take you through a journey real quick. Before the cloud, there was a very clear delineation between what developers were in charge of and what IT and operations teams were in charge of. Developers would worry about the code they wrote and the open source libraries they brought into their code base. And then IT and operations would sort of provide this golden image where the application would be running in a production setting. Now, fast forward, and as organizations have kicked on this digital transformation and moved to the cloud, you could see that it's now more along the line of the developer's responsibility, together with their IT and operations teams, to manage the risk that's introduced. But a lot of that does fall on the hands of the developers. Developers still have to worry about the vulnerabilities in their code and the vulnerabilities in the open source components that they assemble their applications with. But now, through containerization and infrastructure as code, developers are also now responsible for the configuration, the operating system in that container, as well as the networking and other infrastructure-related rules in the way they spin up cloud infrastructure. So what does this mean? It means that there's more software in developers' hands, which means that there's more risk that these developers are responsible for. Now, a lot of that risk is introduced from open source components. So imagine that you're writing an application and you've written 80 lines of code for your application, and you said, I want to use 3 open source components. Behind the scenes, those open source components might also be pulling in additional dependencies. So those 7 open source components had 59 additional dependencies that they pulled in. And now suddenly your 80 lines of code has become more than 750,000 lines of code. So what this means is over 80% of a modern application's code base comes from open source components. And this has been a party for hackers and bad actors, and also for open source maintainers having to keep up with this. So there's been a huge explosion in the number of open source vulnerabilities that have been disclosed over the last 3 years. And a lot of those vulnerabilities aren't even from the open source components that you say you want to use in your application. It's the open source components required by the open source components required by the open source components, where the majority of that risk is introduced, otherwise known as transitive dependencies. Now, with that, let's go back to the world of the developer and really think about what is the new risk profile of the software that they're building look like. Starting with the custom code. This is an organization's secret sauce. This is internally developed code that is really gluing together a lot of the pieces of the application, particularly if open source is being used. Now, talking about open source, we mentioned 80 to 90% of that code base was open source. So the custom code glues together the open source components. Both of these areas need to be tested for security risks and potential vulnerabilities. Now, there's the code, there's the open source. This was the traditional world of the developer, as shown in the earlier slide. Now, in the cloud, developers are also responsible for the container that they package their application into, which might also introduce hundreds of open source components. And as mentioned, the infrastructure is code, which the number one vulnerability in cloud environments are improperly configured environments. So developers, which are not experts on network security, storage, servers, firewall rules, suddenly now they're also in charge of configuring how all these things are spun up, because they're the ones that know what their applications need. So the developer's job has become much more difficult, if you will, now that the cloud has given them so much power. And to help developers build securely, this is why Snyk has introduced our cloud native application security platform. So let's think about the developer's perspective for a second. Here's a screenshot of a typical GitHub repository. That GitHub repository might contain the custom code. It'll contain the open source components in a package manager manifest or log file. It'll contain the definition for building the container, no pun intended, and YAML files that typically define the infrastructure as code. These are all the things that developers are responsible for. And the way that we as Snyk through our platform can help them is make sure that the testing of all these components can be integrated across the software development lifecycle. So from the IDE where they work to the source control system where the application is stored, the CI/CD pipelines where it's built, and ultimately the environments where the applications are running. We want to provide a great developer experience to help them spend less time finding and fixing issues and more time actually developing. We want to make sure that that developer experience is insightful and powered by deep security intelligence to help to deliver on that promise of helping them finish remediation faster, while providing enterprise governance features that connect the work that the developers are doing to the IT and operations teams that are downstream from the work, giving them access and visibility to the work developers are doing through policies, reporting, and other functionality within the platform. So to double click on that last point around security, I'll get there, but first, let me talk about why Snyk is doing this differently. We are laser focused on the developer. So we're focused on making sure the tools are plugged in where the developers need them at the time they need them, so that security is not seen as a hindrance, as a blocker. We want to make sure that developers are able to apply the fixes and the insights that Snyk presents quickly. So we've released features like automatic pull requests and which direct dependency to upgrade to fix an issue in a transitive dependency to make sure that to reduce the chances that a fix might break an application that someone's writing. Finally, again, making sure that they have broad coverage and insights from our dedicated security team throughout the software development lifecycle. To double click on that final point, our Snyk Intel security knowledge base is what powers those insights. We report the information from the National Vulnerability Database, but we're also a CVE numbering authority. So vulnerabilities that our own security research team discovers are reported back to the NVD. We're partnering with many organizations across the ecosystem to make sure that these fixes and this information is widely available. We typically publish vulnerabilities before the National Vulnerability Database publishes them. So this means that developers using Snyk get access to the information they need faster. And of course, trying to curate that information and to keep it as accurate as possible to reduce the noise. And these capabilities, they're really seen as trusted by the industry. Red Hat, which Parag will talk about what we're doing together around dependency analytics, as well as other vendors have integrated our security intelligence within their own offerings. So what is this all about? Yes, we're going to help developers shift left, but the other piece of our equation around that enterprise governance point I mentioned earlier is we also want to enable their extended teams, those IT, security, and operations people, to support developers. So everybody's working cohesively as a unit. And that way we can help security scale within an organization. Now, before I hand it over to Parag, just to give you a preview of what we've been working on together with Red Hat, let's imagine an OpenShift environment. That's what this red box is on the screen right now. When working within an OpenShift context, a developer might be writing code using a CodeReady workspace or an Eclipse Che or an IDE running on an OpenShift cluster or on their local workstation. So we've integrated Snyk into the dependency analytics plugin that Parag is going to talk about, so they have access to security information right within their IDE. Your source control system, a Bitbucket server or a GitHub Enterprise, might also be running on OpenShift. So we have the ability to connect to those source control systems so that we can check the code as pull requests are submitted, and also as changes are merged from one branch to another. We've integrated into various CI/CD systems. If you're using the new OpenShift pipelines experience within OpenShift, we have a set of Tecton tasks that can be used to add Snyk to your pipelines. Or if you're using Jenkins pipelines still from before OpenShift pipelines was a thing, we can support that as well as other CI systems. When an image is in the container registry, we recently, as of last week, released the ability to quickly scan images stored in the Quay container registry. But that if you're also using the OpenShift internal registry or any other container registry of your choice, we have the ability to scan those images as well. And finally, through reporting and through our API, be able to turn that container registry into a trust boundary before deploying an application to production, where we'll keep an eye on that project for any new vulnerabilities that are disclosed for the open source components in that code. So together, Snyk and Red Hat are working to implement security throughout the entire software development lifecycle. Now, to talk a little bit about specifically Red Hat Dependency Analytics, I'm going to turn it over to Parag, where he's going to talk about the work we've been doing together. So, Parag.
Thank you, Tomas. That was good. And welcome, everyone. So, yeah, let's dive deep into the Red Hat Dependency Analytics and how it's powered by Snyk Intel, as Tomas shared earlier. Is the characteristics of the vulnerability database. Next slide, please. So, Red Hat Dependency Analytics it's a hosted service that is run on OpenShift, and it is consumable by a developer from the most preferred channel being the IDE extension. So it has been around for a few years, and up until recently, it was actually leveraging the NVD to provide the vulnerability analysis. And as Tomas mentioned, there is a big difference, right, between the Snyk Intel database and NVD, in terms of timeliness, in terms of accuracy, and in terms of the breadth and the coverage. But it's just not just about CVEs, but it's more than that. So when we were looking at how can we provide a better service to the developers who are adopting the extension, we had to provide a system where we can report accurately on all the vulnerabilities that are known as much as possible, and hence broader coverage than what is available in NVD. We wanted to provide more information than just the vulnerability information. So we wanted to provide things like, hey, can this vulnerability be exploited? If so, how can it be exploited? Is it a mature exploitation? Is it something which is kind of not known yet? In which version was this fixed? So that you can at least make a decision to say, there is no recommended version to go to, which is vulnerability free. At least you can figure out where it's been fixed. We wanted to have coverage for all the ecosystems in mind. So that's starting, and I'll cover that as what ecosystems we have supported today. So we wanted a vulnerability database that covers all the targeted ecosystems. The timeliness was very important. We wanted to provide information as soon as possible to the developers versus waiting until it is available in the NVD, because there is that time gap that could be crucial depending on the application and the kind of exploitation that could happen to the vulnerability. And because it is an existing system, we had it running on OpenShift and had the whole mechanism in place. We wanted to make sure that we can ingest the data very easily from the Snyk side and feed it into our AI models, so that when we are providing the analysis, if we don't have to go back and do a lot of reworking of the backend. So these are some of the key aspects in mind which led us to upgrade from NVD to Snyk Intel as the preferred database. Next slide, please. So what is Red Hat CodeReady Dependency Analytics? As I mentioned, it's a hosted service that runs on OpenShift, and it is available to be consumed by developers, the most common from an IDE. It basically looks at manifest files. of your package, and it is able to analyze your application stack. So it figures out, like, from the manifest, what dependencies are you pulling in, and we look at all the open source libraries that are in your stack, and what are the vulnerabilities in those. Are there any kind of a license compliance issue, for the libraries you've chosen versus the licensing that you have declared for your application? We've also pulled some information from the, like GitHub and all that about, hey, how popular is a library that you have pulled down, and what is kind of like the maintainability index of that. Once we have this information, you as a developer can totally just analyze, report on all these things, and even fix them directly from the IDE. So this way, you can find and remedy your vulnerabilities and security issues and licensing issues without ever leaving your source code editor. You can just do it from right there. Currently, we support Java, Maven, JavaScript, Node.js, Python, PyPy, and Golang applications. So if you happen to be working on any one of these, just grab the extension from the marketplace of your IDE, and you can start, connecting directly into our hosted service. Next slide, please. So when you're in the IDE, when you open up the manifest file, one of the things that by having the plugin in your system is it automatically analyzes your manifest file that's open. So immediately you will see an analysis pop up in your IDE editor window about what do we find in terms of the vulnerabilities, inside your manifest file. Because our analysis is being done on the back end, we are integrated with Snyk Intel. All the data you see here in the IDE actually is fed based upon the vulnerabilities and security issues recorded by Snyk Intel. In here, you can also just very quickly, with a single click, update to the recommended version. So we'll say, hey, here's a vulnerability that we found. Here are all the details. We recommend you go to this version. And there is just click on a button, and boom, your manifest file gets updated. If you want, you can commit that change, push it to your Git repo, and now you've adopted the fix that we have given you. We also have an API that is the same exact thing that you see in the IDE editor that you can call directly if you wanted to via an API. And we are actually very close to releasing a CLI. That's the same exact thing. So then you can have an API-based and a CLI-based analysis of a manifest file. All we need is just, what's the manifest file? Next slide, please. Now, when you're doing, when you are in the IDE editor and getting analysis, you'll be prompted to actually look at the full report, because as you can imagine, there's real estate. You're in the IDE editor, so what you really want to get is the full report, where you can actually get complete details about the vulnerabilities and other things that we found in the manifest file. So you get details about each vulnerability. You click on the button. We call this the stack analysis report. So in this report, you'll get things like, hey, for each dependency that I have, how many of them actually have vulnerabilities? And if so, what are the known exploits? What are the vulnerabilities that are uniquely known to Snyk? And how would you, what is your recommended version to remedy these vulnerabilities? So you can actually get all those details right there. And in order for you to see this information about exploits and things like that, if you just register with Snyk and let us know, and I'll cover that later on how to do that, then you'll have the ability to see all of this information directly from this detailed report. Next slide, please. As Thomas mentioned earlier, right? Like, it's not just about the dependencies you're pulling into your stack. The dependencies that they pull in, and hence your transitive closure of every dependency that is in the ecosystem based upon what you have decided to import into your manifest. That's a pretty big set. So in some cases, like, you may have like 10 libraries and like 700 transitive dependencies that each one has to bring in. So we show you as well what are the vulnerabilities in these transitive dependencies that are then affecting your direct dependency. So your direct dependency may not have any vulnerabilities, but you're inheriting them because of what's being imported by the direct dependencies. So you can see all of that. So we generate the complete set for you in your IDE when you actually run this analysis. And we perform the entire analysis and then show you the details of it in the report. So you can see the vulnerabilities in direct dependencies and transitives when you actually launch the extension. Next slide, please. Similarly, about licensing, we look at all the licenses that are declared in the packages that you're pulling in. And there are a couple of use cases. We can either recommend a license for your application in case you don't have declared one. And if we have declared one, then we look for conflicts. Like, are you basically picking up any kind of restrictive or incompatible licensed packages for your application depending on where you are? So if your application is highly permissive, but the ones that you have picked up are actually very restrictive, then you're going to have a conflict. So we can show you that. And to achieve this information, we are integrating directly with the public repository, so Maven Central and all that, so we can then show you this information. Next slide, please. One of the other things that we do with the maintainability popularity is that your libraries, your dependencies in your stack, if you feel like, given where you are, like there are other open source libraries that you may actually be able to import into your application, that could basically augment the stack that you have. So we basically look at, people who have stacks like yours, what are the other libraries that they have? And how popular are those libraries? And what is the kind of like, are they maintained? Are they really not very stable? Then we will not include them in our recommendation. So we provide you, a few suggestions on what you could do to augment your stack. The goal being that we can help you build a higher quality application stack. And we provide you with some feedback loops, like thumbs up, thumbs down, so you can let us know whether you like the recommendation we have made or not. And as you can imagine, that then gets fed into our AI models that can then improve the recommendation the next time around. Next slide, please. So in summary, with our integration with Snyk and a partnership with Snyk and with the dependency analytics plugin and service that we have, you as a developer now has access to an improved vulnerability analysis, much better decision support for remediation of these security issues. The user experience is completely integrated. So from the IDE extension, you can actually access a lot of the Snyk data, and there are hyperlinks for each one else. You can actually click on it, and you can actually punch out into the Snyk UIs to get more details. And best of all, it's free to use. Just go grab it and just start using it. There is no licensing requirement with the Red Hat or with Snyk to actually use the dependency analytics. Next slide, please. All right, then this is the live demo from Thomas. Yay, fingers crossed.
Right. This is not time for us to show now that we've told, right? This is where things get interesting, and we're gonna be doing this interactively. So I'll be narrating and driving the demo. Parag, feel free to comment wherever you'd like to. But to set the stage, we do have what I'm about to show you available as a workshop on our Snyk Academy, solutions.snyk.io. There's a section under Red Hat where you can take everything I'm about to show you for a spin yourself, and it'll walk you through it. And so just a quick inventory. We have an OpenShift cluster. This is a managed OpenShift cluster running on IBM Cloud. We have sample code that, again, is available on GitHub in our partners repository in case anybody wants to follow along or try this with their own. We're going to be pushing images to a Quay registry where the image will live before getting deployed to OpenShift. And of course, we have Snyk that's going to be notifying us of the risks of these vulnerabilities. Now, where I'm going to start is actually none of those. I'm actually going to start in the IDE. So let's talk about the developer experience and show a little bit about what dependency analytics can do for a developer as they're writing their code. So starting here, I've cloned this repository. It's the same sample application that I showed you in the previous screen. And we've opened our package.json file. This is our Node.js application's dependency manifest. And here we can see all the dependencies that our application is declaring. These are the ones that we say we want these. Now, Parag hinted at this during the presentation. If I hover over any of these dependencies, this is dependency analytics starting to give me some helpful information around the dependencies that I'm using. So first, it'll tell me what this library is. So ADM zip is a JavaScript implementation of zip. It'll give me the latest version, which as a developer is very helpful for me to know if I'm using an outdated version of a library. And then if there are any vulnerabilities known for that library, we'll actually see them here, where we can actually tell you, hey, is there an exploit available for this vulnerability? If you want to read more about this, we have this peak problem kind of call out that shows you that same information. Now, as Parag said, if you want dependency analytics to guide you through a fix, you see it provides a recommendation. Version 0.5.3 would be one to upgrade to remediate this vulnerability. By clicking quick fix, dependency analytics will actually update that in your manifest file for you. And so now instead of 0.4.7, we're running 0.5.3. And if we hover our mouse over it, that is a version of this package that does not have a vulnerability. So this is how dependency analytics helps us not only learn more about the dependencies that we're using in our application, but it introduces us to the security risks that the dependencies themselves introduce, as well as telling us what version we'd want to upgrade to in order to get rid of that vulnerability. So as a developer, you would probably want to take your time upgrading your dependencies. I can go through this, and this application, I'll give you, it's designed to be very, very insecure. So it'll have more than one vulnerability. However, as a developer, you probably want to upgrade a dependency, rebuild your application, test it, make sure it works before committing your code over to your GitHub repository, which is what we're about to do now. So I'm going to go ahead.
One comment about the recommendation is the recommendation is based on the most recent vulnerability-free version of that library. So in case none exists, like let's say that the library does not even have a single version that's vulnerability-free, then you will see recommendation NA. And then at that point in time, maybe the fixed-in version helps you to say, all right, well, at least it got fixed in this other version, but now that version has its own fair share of problems. But at least you can kind of start addressing the vulnerabilities as you go forward. So that's how the recommendation works. Is unless there is if there is no vulnerability-free version, then we will see they'll see an NA or something like that saying that we can't recommend something right now.
Awesome, Parag. Thank you for calling that out. That's actually a really good point. And that's why it's important to provide this information to the developers so they can research and see the vulnerability and its implications before choosing to upgrade a component, because you're absolutely right. A new component might not have that one vulnerability that the other one had, but it might have its own vulnerabilities. So great call out. Great point. So I'm going to go ahead and check out a new branch because I'm going to call it fix vulnerabilities because I clearly don't know how to type. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit these changes as like new ADM zip package version. And what we'll do there is actually good point, NPM. Thank you. I should generate a new log file. That way, we're making sure that our application, once it gets pushed into Git, nobody can spoof our log file and try to reduce or introduce another dependency other than the one that we just called out. So let me go ahead and check out, get commit, and now we're going to add the package lock JSON file, and we're going to add our package.json file. And if I can type, great. And make sure we commit those. And now we can start pushing that up to GitHub. And then while that runs, it's going to trigger some other changes. While that runs, I'll take care of that in a minute. Just to preview the report that Parag was talking about, the dependency analytics extension will give you the full report of all the issues across all the dependencies. And as Parag said, if you connect this with Snyk by providing a Snyk token, this could be for a free Snyk account, then for each of the vulnerabilities, we'll actually show you not only the information for the vulnerability that takes you to the Snyk Intel website, so you can read more about this vulnerability and learn if this is something that impacts your code. But also we'll tell you this right here, if there's an exploit available for that particular issue. So this might help with your prioritization. If you see a vulnerability that could impact your code, but there's no known exploit for that vulnerability, that's something that you could put lower on the priority list. That's something that has a mature exploit available. So among the other things that you can see in here, you can see the full dependency tree. This is what Parag was mentioning. Check out the dependency tree. It'll let you know some dependency health information, such as how many contributors this particular dependency has, what the latest version of is, how many stars. That way you know that you're not using dependencies that are maintained by a kid in their garage. I have an old boss to thank for that one. And then, of course, the license information, and other dependencies that might help augment your stack. So this definitely worth checking this out. Give it a go. Very, very powerful plugin that's available at no cost. And so I need to, so moving on. Now, in this case, I wasn't able to push the code, and I have a lot to show, so I'm not going to get deep into troubleshooting what just happened. So that was Demo God strike number 1. But now let's go back to our GitHub repository, and let's take that same change that I made in the package.json file just for funsies. I'm going to create the new branch right here. And I'm going to change the version of that package to 0.5.3, which is the one that we upgraded into. Now let's pretend that this is the branch that I just pushed up from the IDE. If I create a pull request to merge this change into my primary master branch, which is where I'm building the production ready version of our code, one thing that I want to call out is Snyk. Because I've connected my GitHub repository to Snyk, we're actually going to test this pull request to make sure no new license issues are being introduced and no new security issues are being introduced into the code base. So we're testing in the IDE. We created a branch in our GitHub repository. We're testing again on the pull request. And that way we can catch issues early before they get merged into the code base. Now, before I merge this pull request, just to kind of see what this looks like within the Snyk UI, I have a couple of projects. Let me go ahead and full screen this that you'll see in Snyk. Here's our GitHub project. So this is the GitHub repository that I was just showing you. We have the representation of that container image in Quay. So this is right before it gets deployed. And then we have our Kubernetes, in this case, OpenShift monitor, which is a certified operator. Woohoo, we recently got that is monitoring the status of the application at runtime and letting us know if our container base image has any risks. So right now, this package.json file, which is the one that we were just looking at, 34 high severity vulnerabilities, 27 mediums, 6 slows. What we're going to do is merge that pull request, which is going to trigger a retest within Snyk once the pull request is merged. So we should see this package.json file once the retest completes. Instead of 34 high severity vulnerabilities, I'm going to go ahead and retest this one now. We should now have 33 high severity vulnerabilities if the demo gods are with us. Now, because there's a whole bunch of automation built up around this, as soon as I merged that branch into my master, or that code change into my master branch in my GitHub repository, another thing that's happening behind the scenes is Quay is rebuilding my container image. And this rebuild of the container image is being monitored by an OpenShift image stream, and it's going to redeploy the application once the new version of the container is built. So while that happens, let's just go back and Snyk, see if the retest finished, and let's refresh the screen, and we should see one less vulnerability in the GitHub repository. In this case, the demo gods are not with us. It still shows 34. But I'll have to investigate that one later on. Oh, it's because I didn't update my log file. See, I knew I had to update the log file. That's not smart, Tomas. Anyway, let's pretend it worked. And let's say Tomas did update his log file and he did commit the change correctly to GitHub and it did rebuild the container image correctly. Now, the other areas of our application that we need to look at is not only the package.json file for the Node application, but also the Docker file. So the Docker file is the base image that we're using to package our container. Right now, we have a base image of Node 10.4. For those of you not familiar with Docker, the Docker file's first line, or somewhere in the Docker file, you'll typically have a from statement. So this is the base image that you're using to package your application into a container. In this case, Snyk is telling us that Node 10.4 has 953 vulnerabilities. 450 of those are high severity, 483 mediums, 20 lows. And one of the things that Snyk does, instead of you having to tackle those 450 high severity vulnerabilities one by one, which you definitely could, we show you some alternative base images that you can consider for your application that might help you to reduce the number of vulnerabilities by hundreds at a time, potentially. So in this case, this is where you as a developer need to be familiar with your application and its architecture and its dependencies, because there's no guarantee that upgrading from Node 10.4 to Node 14 will work. But if it does work and you try it out with your application and it works, then you just fixed 870 vulnerabilities simply by upgrading to a base image. So in this case, Snyk proposes a minor upgrade. So minor upgrades are the ones with the highest chance of being able to work. And we can ask Snyk to open a pull request on our behalf that upgrades our container base image to this Node 10.22, which is more likely to be compatible with our application than Node 10.14. So what's going to happen here, once you click open a fixed pull request, the same thing that I showed you in GitHub, where I took a fixed dependency and, oh no, something broke. Yay, demo. I should see a pull request in here where it's upgrading our base image from Node 10.4 to Node 10.22. So again, same thing. Snyk is going to check to make sure we're not introducing any issues or any more issues than what was already present in an incremental test. We're going to merge this pull request. And what that's going to do, so now we've upgraded an open source component as well as the Docker file. So Quay is yet again going to rebuild our image, because I have a pull trigger set to rebuild the image anytime any activity on the GitHub repository happens. So once it builds in Snyk, so let me go back over here. So before the pretty 404 page. And so in Snyk, once the pull request is fully merged, if I go to the project in the GitHub repository and I retest it after the pull request is merged, which it is, then my base image is going to have the vulnerability counts from Node 10.22. Still significant, but a lot less. Since that automatically rebuilt the image in Quay, my Quay registry integration here, once it also rescans the image after the image has been rebuilt and pushed, I should see my Quay integration here tell me, hey, you're running now Node 10.22. So I kicked off that retest. Let's see what it says. Now, finally, because I have an automatic deployment set up to automatically deploy to the application on OpenShift, this is where things get really dangerous. I hope everything works okay. I have my Snyk Kubernetes monitor set up. So what this is doing, this is monitoring the app as it is deployed on OpenShift. So here's our fantastic Goof application running within the OpenShift cluster. The image just got pushed to Quay, so right now it's probably scaling down and scaling up the deployment again. And if all went well, then I should now be able to retest this deployment of the production workload. And now I should see less vulnerabilities in my ID, in my source control repository, in my CI as a result of Quay rebuilding the image, in the container registry, as well as in the production environment. So we just saw how a fix can trickle down all the way, yay, it worked, from development to deployment. I know that was a lot. Parag, what do you think?
That's so cool. And that's exactly it, because each application goes through such a long set of life cycle steps, right? And so instead of trying to address it at each step, the fact that you could just do it in one place, and yes, you can notify, you can analyze from anywhere, but one change that triggers all of it end to end it's great. I mean, it makes it so much easier with automation. So yeah, I love this part of it.
Awesome.
And it's going to get, it's going to be more interesting as we start bringing in some of these analysis directly into the OpenShift console as well. So then you can start seeing data, while you're in the console to see, oh, we just deployed a pod with this application and here are all the vulnerabilities. Guess what? Push a new version of it. You don't have those vulnerabilities anymore. That's good.
You just gave a teaser of where we're going. I don't know if the audience caught that, but definitely to be able to see within the OpenShift console information about the security state of the workloads, that's pretty big. That would be pretty huge. Again, to that mission that we set at the beginning of being able to not only empower developers, but to give that visibility to OpenShift operators.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Spoiler alert.
It's coming.
It's coming. So other than that, I think that went relatively well. So to kind of recap what we saw, we fixed a dependency. Now, if I check out my master branch, and I don't know how to write, and I pull this code, I should now see there's my new base image that we applied from the Snyk interface. That reflected in our GitHub repository through an automated fixed pull request that ultimately ended up re-triggering the build of the container in the Quay registry that ended up re-triggering the deployment to the OpenShift cluster. So now, just by fixing a vulnerability early, we've made our runtime environment that much more secure. So that was a big demo. But that's what I had for it. So with that, let me just take us on back to the presentation. All right, let us have it, audience, everybody. I'd like to see what does everybody want to know.
All right. Yes, we have plenty of time for questions, guys. We have just about 10 minutes or so. We've gotten a couple questions in, but there's plenty of time. If you have a question for either Parag or for Tomas, go ahead and use that question and answer tab. First one here is from David, who asks, what does it mean that Snyk is certified by Red Hat?
Ooh, Parag, you want to take that one?
Yep. So this is where we have with OpenShift and with Red Hat Linux and various stages of being certified. So what that means now is that the Snyk stack, the operator that is certified by Red Hat to run on Red Hat OpenShift. So if you were in Red Hat Marketplace, if you're inside Red Hat OpenShift, and you have access to the operator hub, you can just pull Snyk down and and run it locally on your OpenShift cluster. Via the operator mechanism that is available. So that's a big step forward for developers and even for architects and for ops to say, yeah, I can just run it locally on my OpenShift environment. So that was one of the big steps. And I know it's, as you can imagine, like getting a product that is running as a hosted service to actually run as an operator on Kubernetes it's a big step. And we are so happy that Snyk and Red Hat spent the time together to make it happen. So that's one of the key benefits you get as a customer running OpenShift. Just bring it in, and you can just run it on your environment.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Great.
And just to double click on that real quick, within the OpenShift console, search for Snyk. There's our operator. You can very quickly install that runtime monitoring capability in your cluster in a few clicks. So thank you for that.
That's pretty nifty. Okay, next question here is from Ajoy, who asks, how can Snyk aggregate our current projects? I guess, and then after that, EG.NET products, or projects?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. So within the Snyk project view, so you import your repositories straight from your GitHub, or in this case, Kubernetes. This is how I imported the OpenShift project. Quay, this is how I imported the container. And the import experience is a matter of just setting what repositories you want to pull in. So if you have a .NET project, a Java project, a Node project, just go ahead and add them into Snyk. And each of those repositories will show up as a separate entity within the Snyk dashboard. And you'll be able to manage each of those, including if your repository has files for multiple languages. So if you have a JavaScript package.json and a POM file in the same repo, for example, they'll show up right here under each of the repositories that you've imported from GitHub.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, next question. Gerald asks, will this be as well beneficial for test automation, especially when using Eclipse or as IDE?
So yeah, so that's so when we look at in your typical CI steps that you could be doing is bringing in the if you bring in the plugins that are there for Jenkins or for Tecton, if that happens to be a CI, or just use CLI and just create the tasks for your environment, depending upon which platform products you use. Then you can incorporate this into your automation part of it, where you can now say, hey, look, as a part of automation, can we make sure that our dependencies and all these things are clear and we don't have any vulnerabilities, or at least you can choose what to do with them. If you get notified about vulnerabilities, we want the tests to move forward, not move forward. So that's what we have seen is the most common use. And then if you're doing it manually, even from inside the IDE, with the IDE extension, currently we can run them on VS Code, you can run them on any of the JetBrains IDEs. We are in the process of releasing, from a Red Hat perspective, the dependency analytics, stack analysis report, the full report in JetBrains IDEs as well, almost there. So currently you get the in-IDE analysis, not the full report. That's coming soon for all the JetBrains IDEs. Runs on Eclipse, on EclipseChain as well, which is the upstream project for CodeReady workspaces. So you can do it directly from the IDE, but then that's manual, right? You're inside the IDE and you're looking at the analysis. For automation, totally bring it into your CI pipelines and you're good to go. And you have various ways of doing it. Plug in tasks or write your own tasks. You can see a lot.
Yeah, and I'll add a note to that. So within Snyk, you do have the ability to configure for your source control integration. You have the ability to configure automatic pull requests. So if you have automation set up that retests your code anytime a pull request is opened, you can have Snyk suggest automatically open a pull request to keep your dependencies up to date, which of course triggers your CI workflows. And that way, when you have full automation, it would tell you if upgrading a dependency introduces a breaking change. So there's, it definitely plays very nicely with existing we might have.
Awesome. All right. Great. We still have plenty of time for questions, guys. If you do have one, go ahead and use the question and answer tab and get it on in. And we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if we don't get to your question during the webinar today, please know that the folks at Red Hat and Snyk are getting a copy of all the questions that come in. So they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. Okay, next question here is from Michael, who asks, is the operator a Helm chart or is it written in Go?
Ooh.
It's Go. I don't remember.
Thank you. Because I know it can be deployed as a Helm chart, but it's not a Helm operator. It's
okay. All right. All right, next question. Okay, next question. Which IDEs are supported by the Red Hat Dependency Analytics extension?
Yeah. So it's the one that we Thomas was using during the demo. That's VS Code. Right? So let's say you have the IDE in VS Code. EclipseChain, which is using the same editor, the Thea editor is VS Code, and then the Red Hat product, which is CodeReady Workspaces, which is based upon EclipseChain, that is supported as well. All the JetBrains IDEs, so IntelliJ-based ones, so Golang, and pretty much all the PyCharm, WebStorm, all of those. In there, the full stack analysis report is not available yet. It's coming. And then also Eclipse. So Eclipse Studio, you can run it in Eclipse as well. Same thing there. The component analysis is available, but not the stack analysis report. That piece of it is not there yet. So these are all
okay. All right, great. Let's see. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions here. Next question: how is Snyk's vulnerability database updated? Is it by Snyk researchers or a third party source?
Yeah, great question. So we do have our own dedicated security research team within Snyk that curates our knowledge base. We also have collaborations with academic institutions to help augment our database. And we also use various techniques, especially given our recent deep code acquisition, such as machine learning and AI, to help curate the results within the knowledge base and make sure that it stays up to date. So the answer, yes, we have a dedicated team that maintains it.
All right, let's see if we've gotten any more questions in here. Okay, all right, here's one for you. What if the customer is running their repository in a private VPC? How do you connect into a private VPC?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take that as meaning their source control repository, such as a GitHub or a Bitbucket. If you're running it in an OpenShift environment within your virtual private cloud, then we can connect to it using what's called our broker. Snyk has a broker that can be deployed into your virtual private cloud, and it acts as a proxy, if you will, from your on-premise source control repository to Snyk. So we would deploy the broker next to your source control repository where it lives, on-premise, on OpenShift, in the cloud, wherever. And that's how we would be able to connect to your code.
Excellent. All right, I think we have time for one more question here. Let's see. How do you run Snyk? Is it locally as a developer, or do you consume it as a SaaS and integrate it into your pipeline?
So yes, we'll start with that. So
okay, that's a good answer. Yes.
We do have a CLI that can be used, but we also have a wide range of integrations that make it easy to plug Snyk into whatever systems you're using. So what I demonstrated today was the GitHub integration. We demonstrated the Quay integration, which is how I was able to scan images directly in the container registry. The Kubernetes integration, which is how our operator is able to scan workloads deployed into OpenShift. But we also have CI plugins, IDE plugins, integrations into Artifactory, Nexus, various serverless runtimes, Slack, Jira. So you can run Snyk either through the integrations, to answer your question, or using our CLI, which is right here listed in the integrations page. And of course, our API is also available to help you run Snyk against your code.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we are about 3 minutes to the top of the hour. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for questions. I think we got to all the questions, but if we didn't, or if you have a last minute question you have either for Tomas or Parag, please go ahead and use your question and answer tab and get it on in. And like I said before, if we don't address it here during the webinar, the folks at Red Hat and Snyk will be getting a copy of the questions, and they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline. Also, a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, guys, let's see. Let's do the drawing for the $100 Amazon gift cards now. Let's see. Yay! All right, today's winners are Joan S. Congratulations, Joan. Yay, Joan. Second winner is Bruce T. Congratulations, Bruce. Yay, Bruce. Third winner today is Alan J. Congratulations, Alan. Yay, Alan. And finally today, our final winner is Thomas S. Not you, Tomas G. So let's just make sure that we point that out, that Tomas is not the winner. Thomas is the winner. So congratulations to Thomas. Congratulations to all four of you. We'll be following up with all of you via email to get your $100 Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. If you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. All right, Tomas and Parag, thank you both for a great presentation. As always, I think the demo gods were for the most part on your side today, Tomas, with minimal issues, but good stuff all the way around. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. It's always fun to see it, and it's always fun to hear about the technology. And you guys are playing so nicely together. It's just a joy to watch your webinar. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
And I did win because I presume it with Parag.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there you go, right there. Everyone's a winner with this webinar then. All right, I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
Take care.